Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Iowa State Representative and One Country Project Board Member JD Scholten. For the last panel of the day, we'll be discussing a vital topic: the future of media in rural America. In an era where traditional outlets like newspapers are fading, radio is under increasing corporate consolidation, and the internet is often awash in speculation and disinformation, how rural Americans will consume their news may very well shape the future of this country. We have three seasoned veterans from different parts of the media sphere joining us to discuss these topics and more. Joel Heitkamp has been the KFGO radio in Fargo, North Dakota since 2005, taking over as host of the station's flagship program, News and Views, in the spring of 2009. His common sense takes on the news stories of the day have made him one of the most popular radio personalities in the country. He's a multi-award winning talk show host, recognized both regionally and at the national level. Pat Kreitlow is a founding editor of Up North News, a progressive state-based newsroom from Wisconsin that began operating in January 2020. Pat is the morning host of the Up North News Radio, heard a weekday mornings, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. on 8 stations around Wisconsin. Pat was a longtime former evening news anchor at WEAU TV in Eau Claire before serving a term in the Wisconsin legislature, where he chaired the Senate Committee on Rural Affairs and Information Technology. Jourdan Bennet-Begaye works as the Washington editor at Indian Country Today, a daily digital platform that covers the Indigenous world. She completed the Newshouse Graduate Newspaper Fellowship for Minorities at the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communication at Syracuse University in New York. Obtaining her master's degree in magazine, newspaper, and online journalism takes her one step closer in creating her own magazine for Indigenous communities and exploring Mother Earth. Joel, Pat, and Jourdan, welcome to the Rural Progress Summit. We'll start with Jourdan. Jourdan, Indian Country Today is a nonprofit news source. Nonprofit news sources are growing increasingly popular. What challenges and benefits do you face as a nonprofit news source?
That's a really great question. I was trying to write down like all the benefits and the challenges. And immediately comes to mind, the challenge is, of course, just like the reports that are needed from our business team. That take up a lot of time. But in a way, it helps keep us on track and help us keep our focus. To me, I think the benefits way more outweigh the challenges. And, there's a huge emphasis on public service with being a nonprofit newsroom. You're more community oriented and community focused. And we serve, not only Indigenous readers, but non-Indigenous readers, and providing that content and the nuance to stories that's much needed. And, it's another funding mechanism that I think we didn't know that could be possible, right? And behind that, there's also a huge support network right now. We're a member of the Institute for Nonprofit News. So we also, share content with other members who are part of that network too. And, have these conversations to help us, get through this new time for our industry. And that's really great to have, especially when it's, again, brand new for a lot of us. But the big one, I think, for us, besides being a public news service and having a heavy emphasis on that, is providing free content. That's always been our number one goal as an Indigenous news service. We don't want to have subscriptions or paywalls. We want to provide that content and encourage other outlets to share our content, whether it's digital copy or videos or photos, etc.
Here in Western Iowa, we had several newspapers come together to create a nonprofit, and one of them is a Pulitzer Prize award-winning paper, and so the second smallest one ever in the history of the prize. But they have said it might be going out of business after the pandemic if it wasn't for switching over to a nonprofit model. So it's something for that is close to home with us. Pat, you started the Up North News to provide more balanced coverage to rural areas. Do you think outlets like yours can grow to fill a void left by the decline in rural newspapers?
Yes, most definitely. This is something that was necessary, but it doesn't do you any good to provide something that's necessary if it isn't accessible as well. And as more people throughout the country, including rural America, become more familiar with getting their news and information through various online sources, that makes it easier for outlets that are completely digital. They don't have a printing press, they don't have a broadcast tower, to have influence. Keeping in mind, of course, that influence has to be accompanied by trust. So we can get into places where newspapers are getting smaller and shutting down, and we can start to reach people there, but we won't be reaching them for very long if there isn't that sense of trust by providing solid, fact-based information and features that connect close to home. And that is one way that we are excelling, is not doing the same old features about the same old places, but again, getting out through the rest of Wisconsin and helping people feel that connection. If we can do that, we can't replace every daily or weekly newspaper in Wisconsin that is, shuttering or shrinking, but we can provide a good alternative through the Up North News digital products, and also through the radio project, which is a separate company called Civic Media, but Up North News has a weekday morning program on the Civic Media stations, and they're going specifically for stations that are reaching out throughout much of rural Wisconsin. And so it's a multi-pronged approach that is helping provide a fact-based news product to areas that otherwise would become news deserts.
Oh, that's great. And then, Joel, I believe you're on the line here. Question for you. So you've been a host of a radio talk show for many years. Do you see radio continuing to remain a viable news source for rural America? And are you concerned at all about the growing number of automakers that are excluding AM from car radios?
Well, I think we got Ford straightened out, to be honest with you. I think Ford tried to play a big card, and speaking as a Ford driver, I got half ticked off and was ready to buy a Dodge. But I think we are, and I think that the point behind it all is, if you go out in a farmer's shop in the middle of winter and say, all right, let's turn it on, and they're all listening to AM radio. I mean, that's what they're listening to. Now, where I'm at, what we did was we pushed to get an FM signal and simulcast our AM signal with it. And I think that was really important. Obviously, the clarity and the penetration and everything that went with it. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. For emergency reasons alone, AM radio will be there. There's no question about that. The popularity of AM radio, I was told when I went to work for KFGO years ago, and we're on a number of other stations here as well that take our broadcasts. But I was told when I went to work there that we're going to be about 3 years behind the Twin Cities and WCCO. So if WCCO folds, goes under, or things go pretty bad, it's going to go bad for you. It's been just the opposite. What's happened is WCCO is in trouble. They're last in the market there. And the reason they're in trouble versus us, and the reason that our audience has grown and our revenue has grown, is because of the fact that we program yet. I got a big staff that knows the area. We don't talk national politics unless, of course, it comes at us, which, like it did today. My show is all national politics today. But on any given day, we could be talking about deer hunting or, and so as long as we're talking about what they're talking about when they sit around that table at the bar, we're going to be relevant. And I think that's why we're number one. I think AM stays relevant as long as you make it interesting, I guess, is my answer. That's a long answer, I know.
No. That's interesting because in Sioux City, where I live, we have 3 news stations, and one of them was bought out a couple of years ago, and finally they just said that they are no longer doing local anything. They're just national stuff. And in your point of, as long as you can make it local as much as possible, I think is the thing that, and it gets back to what Pat was saying, and even Jourdan too, just how that trust is when it's at a local level. So
well, we tried that, years ago in the old Clear Channel, now iHeart days, they owned us. And so we took Rush Limbaugh, and then we had a local program, and then we took the Ed Schultz national show. And so we were local in the morning, great ratings. Rush Limbaugh, average ratings, not terrible ratings, but average ratings. In the afternoon with Ed's national show, the ratings tanked. I mean, they weren't good at all. And so it was national, and that really turned people off. And so we went back under new ownership to local, someone that understands good local radio, and our ratings took off again. And so now I manage a pretty significant staff that gets it. So I think I'm repeating myself, but I think it goes back to local programming.
This question is kind of just for everyone. So venture capital, we've seen, has played a predominant role in the decline of local independent newspapers through debt-laden acquisitions and gutting local newsrooms to generate short-term profit boosts. What advice would you give to communities and just kind of folks like us that do not want, that we want to save our papers and that we want to save some sort of local just habitat when it comes to journalism? Pat, do you want to start?
I'll give it a crack here. As far as what communities can do, it's first off, I'm going to concede the challenge of the question, because it's just something that most people don't think of. They think that their local newspaper will always be there, that their local radio station will always be talking to them, until it's not. And quite often it's too late by the time a community becomes aware of it. So and now, you look at me, having gone from being an anchor at the biggest TV station in Western Wisconsin. And when I decided to come back into the news business, I'm very happy doing what I'm doing now as a digital newsroom, talking to people throughout the state. It's not that I don't appreciate what local media is trying to do, but we just know that the audience in the United States is fractured like never before. And so you are looking at multiple platforms, multiple formats for reaching them. TV and radio stations, are doing digital broadcasting as well. They're on Facebook and they're on YouTube and what have you. But for those communities that sense that there may be an issue with their, locally owned media, I think all they can really do is begin to have that community discussion as far as whether there is a way. You can't make everybody on Main Street, start to buy ads for your paper or your radio station. So right now, all you can do is try to be proactive in showing your support. But we're in a business model for all media that we're still feeling our way through. Apple started up its iPod and iTunes during my final days at the TV station, and I just could not believe that newsrooms weren't moving into that a micro pay model, not 99 cents a song, but maybe 10 cents to read a news article or something like that. And now you really can't even consider that anymore. That time has passed. You're either doing a paywall or you're not, and you're looking for other ways to underwrite your field. And so we're going to have to continue to work our way through this business model, and local communities, fail to support their local media at their own peril.
Yeah, and I'll get to Jourdan in a second, because you're a little bit different. You're more of a national paper. But Joel, do you have a response to how as a community could we save it, keeping it local?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is that people assume in the rural areas that they're not using multiple platforms, like you just heard. For example, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it, right? The obituaries, the for sales, everything else that goes with it. Hey, what was the local high school basketball game? all of that stuff needs to not just be in the paper. It needs to be on kfgo.com. It needs to be on Facebook. It needs to be on Twitter. And I know print media has done a good job of keeping up with that. I think that when I began in radio, it was audio. I mean, that was it. It was audio. Now we're doing video from the studio. Now we're doing, the minute we get something in our newsroom, we got a 4-person newsroom at KFGO. And it's just as important that they get it on Facebook as that they get it on air. And that's completely changed between Twitter and Facebook and everything else that goes with it. And I require my whole staff to blog. So basically, they're no different than writing columns in the newspaper. It's multiple. And if you don't do it all, you're going to fall behind. And that's what happened to a lot of the old broadcasters, I might add. They didn't like it. They thought they just leaned into that microphone and talked. And because of that, some of the rural area left them behind because they're listening through their apps. They're listening through I'll give you guys a good example. The Twins, Major League Baseball won't let you put the Twins on your app, right? You got to go through MLB. Well, you know what? Have a big series with Twins and then come in and answer my phone the next morning. I get my ass chewed out like you wouldn't believe because they can't get it on KFGO like they always do on their app, which tells you how many people are listening on their app. And so, what you just heard, I think is spot on, whether it's local papers or local radio.
Can I just offer anecdotally, just based on something Joel just said? My in-laws are retired dairy farmers, and they're 80 years old now. They asked for an iPad. They asked me to help them set up the iPad to do one thing and one thing only. First thing they do is they look up the Manitowoc Herald Times reporter. They don't pay for the newspaper, but they go on that iPad to read the obituaries. And so the Herald Times reporter had better find a way to get display ads next to those obituaries, or they're offering up something that's a nice service, but they're getting nothing for it.
Agreed.
Yeah, when I ran for Congress, the number one thing I did was make sure that my ads were as close to the obituary page as possible. So, Jourdan. Okay, so they're far more hyper local. You're more of a national paper. So what's the difference in the model with that, and kind of how do you get that engagement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we do our national and see national issues, but I think what's different about like Indigenous communities is that if something's affecting a tribe in Washington State, it could also affect a tribe in New Mexico or in North Dakota. So we really try to localize it and pull an example there and then bring a national perspective and say, like, this is how it could affect other places as well. Because a lot of, the legal systems that we're under are similar, but they're also very different. And I think now we're establishing more bureaus across the country, it's going to, a lot of the overlap of stories is going to happen with slight differences. So it's just a lot of zooming in and out for us and looking at communities and saying this is how it's impacting you, or even Alaska is another great example. They're vastly different from a lot of the lower 48. And because they're set up legally different, they only have one reservation up there. We have reservations down here, but so it's just trying to keep those a lot of the policy and legal frameworks in mind when we do stories.
One thing that people in Iowa don't really realize, the district I represent is the second most Native district in the entire state, behind the one that has the Meskwaki reservation on. So I don't take that lightly for Sioux City, and so. But I'll go back to you with, and this is one of the things that I try to always focus when we talk about media. How do we get engaged with younger audiences? And so we're seeing like podcasting and YouTube news programs are becoming increasingly popular. How do you guys work with younger and trying to attract younger people?
We do a lot of social media. Right now, I feel like a lot of the time, like Indigenous media, we're kind of behind in that. We get the benefit of learning from the mistakes of mainstream media. So yay for us and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't work. But interestingly enough, like a lot of if you look at our social media analytics, 90% of our readers come from Facebook. I mean, that's just where Indigenous people are. They air their laundry up there, but they share information. And social movements like I Don't Know More up in Canada, or even Standing Rock, have started on social media. So it does play a huge role in Indigenous communities. The other one is also trying to, we have a ICT newscast with Leah Chavez, so we're in broadcast, and we try to get that up on YouTube and on, again, like Instagram, to capture the younger audiences. My goal, hopefully like in the next year, is to start building a social media team so we can start creating content, not just sharing what it's happening on digital broadcast and putting that content on there, but having younger people build content specifically for social media, and just playing around with all the fun ways that we can do that.
Very cool. And Joel, you mentioned having a blog and putting it visually on Facebook as much as audio. Is that the way that you guys go after a younger audience, or is there other things that you focus on?
Well, we've got the burden of, what our target is advertising wise. And I'll give you an example of the home base at KFGO. We're a family in Fargo of 6 radio stations. And so we've got Y94 that targets teenagers. We've got Froggy 99 that tries to get in that country listening area. And so we don't try to compete with the music in as much as what we use bump music to connect with a younger audience, and then hire young. I think that helps. But one of the burdens that a lot of people in AM radio have is the recognition that a lot of the audience is older. And by that, I mean that my target audience that I get the most from selling is men 35, 64. And so they're going to buy the combines, they're going to buy the tractors, they're going to buy the Harleys, they're going to buy the boats and the pontoons. And so that's my target audience. And in broadcast media, sometimes it goes to there. And then there's an assumption that by the time they get to a certain age, they come your way. And of course, I think Sears did some of that. The fact that for $25 a month, they can buy all the music they want. They just punch it in. And so the other stations are in more trouble than us. But to pretend that I'm trying to get an 18-year-old audience, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I think that's unachievable by what we're doing in AM radio.
I've talked about like I used to play professional baseball, and now talking about like in the baseball world or in the politics world, I think that younger audience is always like the golden egg or whatever. You're always trying to chase it. So how about Pat? What in Wisconsin? What do you guys try to do?
Well, we have a very young CEO for Courier Newsroom, which is our parent organization. Tara McGowan, I think, is now 37 or 38. And she's always been aware of the need to reach the next generation of news consumer. And during our first year or two, 2020, 2021, she said it's great that we started as a website, and then we added, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And she said, but the moment that I've got the budget to do it, we're expanding to TikTok. And geezers like me kind of snickered and said, they're just dancing on there right now. And TikTok is now our fastest growing platform for some of our outlets, doing very little more than putting up short video clips. It might be Iowa Starting Line doing a clip from the Iowa legislature, or it might be one of my radio guests talking about something. But young people aren't opening a newspaper. They're not going over paywalls. But if they see something interesting on TikTok, they will stop scrolling for a little bit of time and take a look at it. It might be one of our news stories. It also might be one of our features about, who's got the best water slides in Wisconsin Dells out of all the resorts. So we definitely have a focus of looking at them. One of our target audiences for Up North News in Wisconsin has always been young families. I say that as somebody who honestly believes Gen Z is going to save this country. I'm very early Gen X. My generation gave us Paul Ryan and Scott Walker and people like that. And I'm rather embarrassed by it all. And I love what I'm seeing in Gen Z. So we're constantly trying to reach out to young families to help make the news more approachable to them. And that is something that's very, very aggressive on our part, to bring them information, but to do so in an attractive way, in a platform and in a format that they are accustomed to, not your basic radio show or newspaper. We have to do it all.
Yeah, and I'll also throw a plug in for, I do a newsletter through Courier News called "You're Probably Getting Screwed." It's an economic populist one. So I'm grateful. I see Tara's vision, and I'm very grateful for it. Jourdan, you mentioned your mobile focus as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah, sure. No, I laugh at TikTok because it's so funny. My sister and I have started to go to TikTok to like search for things, because it's not Google. I'm still a little bit Google, but she goes immediately TikTok, then Google. So it's just, the generations we're in. So when ICT was revived in 2018, because it's, we laugh and call ourselves a 40-year-old something startup, because we have a big legacy, but our focus has always been mobile. So any content we generate or post, we always think, what does it look like on a phone? And our data shows that 2 out of 3 of our readers consume our news like on their phone. So whenever, photos, videos, like what does it look like? It's on a phone is always at the front of our mind, and then the desktop after that.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I guess that's affected our demographics too. All right, because for the longest time, our number one demographic was 25 to 34-year-olds. And that was like for about 4 years. And just in the last year, it kind of flipped. So it's now 25 or 35 to 44-year-olds.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So one of the questions I have for Joel. So Iowa in particular has 22 talk radio stations across the state. And I get asked a lot from national folks, especially during the Iowa caucus and when I ran for Congress, about how we've seen Iowa shift from a proudly purple state to a redder state, and kind of what are some of the things that have come to that. And one, to me, is the Democratic brand is really struggling in the state of Iowa, and people want to ask, like, why is that? Is it the popularity of the Republican Party? And poll after poll after poll shows the Republicans are still not popular here. They'll vote for them, but they're not popular. But to me, one of the biggest things is misinformation that you see on Facebook. But the other part of it is when you have these 22 talk radio stations, 10 hours a day of talking about Republican-leaning things, that's where the average voter, to me, is getting persuaded on. And Democrats just don't have the counter argument. So as somebody who's in a redder state than Iowa, but who's is left of center, how do you have success in North Dakota, and how do you go about, like, what's your secret sauce?
Well, you got to listen. Today I had a couple callers on my show that did everything but call me an a-hole. I mean, they didn't like old Joel, but you know what? It wasn't them that I was trying to get to listen. It was the people that were texting me right afterwards saying, boy, you sure were polite, or boy, that was interesting, or boy, he gave you both barrels. I mean, those are the people you need. You need to get people on and get them to listen that don't like you. And then when the people that don't like you call in like they did today, the people in the middle do like you. And it works. I would argue, JD, that Democrats for years have had their head where it doesn't belong when it comes to talk radio. I was no fan of Rush Limbaugh, but I knew the power of Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh was incredible. He changed media in the rural area forever. And so a lot of Democrats are afraid of talk radio or hate talk radio. It's one of the two. That, if they're on if a conservative calls them and they're sitting there, why would I go on his show? Well, here's why you'd go on his show: because the people he's listening to that are listening to him. That's why you go on his show. Don't worry about him, whether you like him or whether he's going to ask you a tough question. If you can't answer that question, you don't belong in office anyway. And so, to me, the Democrats for years have discounted, diminished, and not respected talk radio. And, that's been to their peril. In the rural area, talk radio is used. And so until the Democrats realize that, they won't be part of it in terms of guests, and they certainly won't be hosts, which to me, I'm not saying I have a litmus test, but I've started out some very good progressive talk radio hosts that when I retire, they're in the business, they've got name branding, all of those things. When I have guest hosts, when I'm on vacation, I put progressives on as much as what I can put conservatives on. But I do put conservative hosts on. Governor Schaefer hosts for me all the time. And the reason is because then I don't look that biased. So I think that's the secret, but I really, really don't believe, I was the state senator for 14 years. And most of the shows in North Dakota were conservative. Heck, Ed Schultz, who I replaced, was ultra conservative. And when Heidi ran for governor in 2000, her campaign manager looked at me and said, let me see if I get this right. Ed Schultz likes football, right? He calls college football. You referee college football. Ed Schultz likes to hunt, both pheasant and deer. You hunt pheasant and deer. Ed Schultz likes to drink beer. You like to drink beer. Why the hell aren't you talking to Ed Schultz more? Get in there and fix this, because Heidi's getting rolled by this guy. And the next thing I knew, I was out in his hunting shack and a regular guest on his show, then guest hosting, and now I got his job. And so, there's no respect for it. You've got to get into it as progressives. And unless you get into it, you're going to get left behind and you're not going to win elections. I'll guarantee you that.
Yeah, I completely see that. And that was a huge part of when I ran in 2018 in the 4th district. We had 80,000 or 70,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats, and Trump won by 27, and we ended up losing just by 3. Huge part of it was going on every radio station that's willing to have me, forcing the issue on a lot of these stations didn't even want me, but showing up and not giving them a reason to say no. And
well, it's free, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's free. Yeah.
Exactly. So, so talking about the talk radio was one part of what I saw happening in Iowa. The other part is the mis and disinformation. And so that's kind of my next question is, what are things that you three, and I'll start with Pat, your organizations trying to counter that, if possible? How do you counter the mis and disinformation that's out there?
Well, you can't counter it if you're not there in the first place. And, so when we talk about whether, progressive media or talk radio, has a future in rural America, well, before they can have a future, they have to have a present. And to have a present, they have to have a presence. Once you're there, then when you are sharing stories about, we just fact checked, Donald Trump, or, here's where, Congressman Tiffany, gets this wrong. I called him out in an editorial. Tom Tiffany is the congressman for Northern Wisconsin, called him out in an editorial about, that there's a war against chocolate milk by the Biden administration. And, I had to take him to task for that. But we had to be there first. So we had to exist. And then once you exist, you can have that conversation and start to make inroads. My philosophy, which isn't that far off of Joel's, but I just go with a typical Wisconsin thing. I bring a supper club mentality into it. When I'm at a supper club, and people will stop me and they'll say, Pat, hey, what's the deal with this or that? And they know I'm going to tell them, and they know they may not agree with everything that I said, but they also know I will not lie to them, that it's fact-based, and that I will be fair. If we present shows and news stories and other options like that, it makes it a lot easier to then call out misinformation that, again, not everybody's going to say, oh, I totally see where so-and-so is lying, but the number won't be 0 because you got in the game in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Jourdan, how do you guys counter that? And one thing that I do want to mention is after my 2020 race, I decided to go on a month-long journey to the Southwest. I'd never been to the Grand Canyon before. And as I was driving through Navajo country, I saw leftover signs of Navajos for Trump. which I don't know if there was an actual organic on the ground grassroots movement, or that was, I assumed it was more they just wanted to show that they were there or whatever. But that just kind of made me think of what's ways that you can counter mis and disinformation.
It's very much all around Navajo. So the signs are there. We try, I mean, like Pat said, if we're not, we have to be there. So we always try to be ahead of the game and in the community and talking to people, and then come back and you respond to it with facts, with stories, and sharing those in a variety of ways, like not just the newscast and digital stories, but social media. Also, like I said, free content and having people share that free content too. And a lot of it is just being on our own timeline too. I mean, we get a lot of pushes like this is urgent, this is immediate. But we try to, look at the entire picture and look at the content and then nuance and then deliver that to our readers and our viewers, since we're on broadcast. And then the big one is just transparency too. I mean, I think that's where the industry has changed a lot in the last, couple of decades, where readers value transparency. And even like for our own newsroom, we let sources or we let people come into our budget meetings and just so they know how the news happens. I mean, that's just how transparent we are.
Yeah. And then Joel, how many times a week or how many times do you have to talk about kitty litters? I'm just kidding about that. But like, how do you counter mis and disinformation?
When it comes up,
I guarantee it does.
And this week, I mean, to me, the last North Dakota legislative session was, it was a joke. These guys were focused on trans bills, and I would challenge them to where the problem is. Find where the problem is. Show me. And it was right out of ALEC. I mean, they grabbed the American Legislative Exchange Council and they said, well, if we do this, we're going to get a bigger donation. And it was a complete joke. But I will tell you this. One of the things that I think for example, do wrong in talk radio, and I've tried to get this fixed, and I have yet to find a way. And
I think you went on mute, Joel.
Okay, hear me now?
There we go.
Okay, I'm really curious to ask Jourdan how we can connect with the tribes better as talk show host. It seems like I have 5 tribes in my immediate listening area, and I drive around the state in a motorhome, right? And I've done radio shows at each one of those tribes, but it's like, do it, gone for 6 months. Do it, gone for 6 months. And I just think there's a real disconnect between what I do and what the tribes do. And when you talk to the tribes, I don't get the sense that they value what we're doing, and I sure don't get the sense that we focus on what the tribes are doing. And so to me, that could be a real strength in my business, to be able to work more with the tribes rather than just buy advertising from a casino.
A lot of the times, a lot of it's just showing up and then having those conversations with them. I do it like all the time just to let them know and what my goals are and, what's important to our newsroom. And of course, asking them what's important to you. But I also feel like the consistency I feel like is important rather than like what you said, like go in there for 6 months, disconnect, go away for a while and go back. And it's the constant relationship building that always has to happen. Because that's what I even though I'm an Indigenous journalist, I constantly have to, go out there and keep that relationship up, because I might be Navajo, but I'm on, Piscataway territory. And so those relationships are different. When I was at grad school in Syracuse, it's the same thing. I was a guest on their territory and had to constantly make sure our relationship was okay, because it is very delicate. Because Native people have already a distrust with the government and with media. And I think that puts us, in an interesting situation. overall. So that consistency and working that relationship and being intentional about it and realizing, being aware of not only the intention, but the impact it could make. Because I feel like we can go with good intentions, but what's that impact going to be for them too?
Thanks, JD. Thanks for letting me ask. Thanks, Jordan.
Yeah. So I guess here's one of my main questions I have is just kind of thoughts on. I've got three great minds here on, and that you guys are constantly trying to reach rural residents. So how do we do that with reliable sources of news? And what advice would you have for news consumers for finding reliable sources of the news aside from just your three news organizations? Pat, do you want to go? Or
I'll take a run at it. I use them. You know, some of the greatest columnists on the papers here, I get on my show. I get the guest host on my show. I want them consistently on my show. I could care less if people are buying a newspaper. The media for years has always taken the attitude that if they're buying a newspaper and they're not taking ads from the radio, get over that. People are going to use what they want to use. And if we can't recognize that, then it's a big, big mistake. I think that you can make friends by putting a conservative columnist on and respecting his work. And next thing you know, he's texting you during your show and listening and giving you information you didn't know. I mean, it's no big secret that during a good radio show, you're getting information constantly during it. And some of that can become from print media and TV media. I did a TV show for a long time here. And, you know, I had $20 for every time I was told I got a face made for radio, I'd be a rich man. But the truth is, once you do it, you realize how hard it is to do. You know, no different than what Tom, I mean, once I have to write this blog once a week, it's brutal. I mean, it's brutal. I don't like to write a column every week, but so you respect the other media outlet more.
And Pat, do you have thoughts on?
I would say I would offer up the advice of never stop encouraging engagement. As I often tell people when I'm doing talks about Up North News, it used to be, you know, ratings were, you know, a Nielsen diary that you filled out by hand. It doesn't work like that anymore. Engagement is the coin of the realm. Everybody that hits that like button or share button or puts down a comment, I mean, we can get those numbers almost instantly. And that engagement, we can watch what a multiplier that it is. Some of our first, you know, viral stories were simply things that were picked up by, like, say, a teachers group, and then they shared it in a teachers group, and somebody else shared it in a statewide teachers Facebook group, and then pretty soon other states were passing that around by encouraging that engagement. It might be, you know, something as soft as it's, you know, National Best Friends Day, tag your friend, and then they're going to go tag somebody, and, you know, where do you get the best old fashioned in Wisconsin? Because then they'll come engage on the news stories, so that when we get a troll showing up about a Pride Month story, now we get 10 more engagements below there saying, well, they're out of line, and, you know, we're proud, you know, of our allies and our friends and what have you. So that engagement, it breaks that wall that used to be me reading a teleprompter. I'm telling you the news. Now we get to do this thing back and forth on all platforms, not just talk radio. We get to do it through all the various digital platforms. And if you want to grow, you got to invite them to come along for the ride.
Jourdan, do you have anything to add with this?
Yeah. I mean, this is something I always think about because a lot of, you know, Native people live in not only urban areas, but again, like rural areas. And that's part of why we have free content and we try to reach out to tribal newspapers because they need content. They have small newsrooms. So we let them know that, you know, our content's free and here's photos or, you know, copy if you need it. And just trying to be creative in that way. Our broadcast too, we put on SoundCloud and allow tribal radio stations to download that. I mean, they can download the entire show, which is about half an hour, or the first 5 minutes, which just brings the headlines. And we've had very much success with that. And down to like the technicalities of like Like, so when we share our digital copy with tribal newspapers, it's even understanding like what it takes to put a paper together, right? Like you can't embed a tweet in a paper. So you're going to have to write that out instead of like embedding it like digital. So it's understanding like all of the little technicalities and differences of that, and how do we deliver to these, local rural residents. And then vice versa, we allow at least tribal newspapers, if we find something great, then we pull that and, post it on our site if it's okay with them. And I think that's a way, to help younger readers who are on their phone all the time to let them know, hey, your local paper is here. We like their stuff. So hopefully that helps like the engagement part of it.
All right. So I have one last question. And this is something, me coming from more of a political mind, when like the difference, I feel we've seen with just messaging, general messaging between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. Trump administration, if they did something, it just seems like all focus was on him, and there was a lot of just if he lifted a finger, everybody knew about it. But the Biden administration, they don't have that same platform. And I went out to DC and met with senior advisors in the White House back in December, and their struggle is they could pass the best thing in the world, and it feels like people where I live in Sioux City won't know about it. So how do we go about creating an opportunity? Because there are great things that have been done in the past couple of years that just hasn't gotten the attention, I feel, on the more local level. And so when we talk about like all politics is local or what have you, I just feel there's a strong disconnect on the Democratic side of politics nationally, and that goes into the whole national brand issue. So I'll start with Joel. Do you have an opinion on how we can kind of bridge that gap?
Well, I don't know. I mean, what you just said is a boom moment. I mean, you want to nail what a conversation like this we're having is about. There it is. Pete Buttigieg just came to Grand Forks to talk about housing, talk about a big grant that was coming through. And Congressman Kevin Cramer was there, or not Congressman, but Senator Kevin Cramer. I wish he was still Congressman. There's my bias. They didn't call us. They didn't call us. I mean, so what ends up happening? I've got red hair. I get ticked off, and it's like, the hell with you guys. You don't want to call us. We're a progressive talk show that's listened to by more people than anywhere else. And, we can talk about ratings. To me, the best way to gauge how well we're doing is how much we get for an ad versus our competitors. So I know we're number one. And they didn't call us. And so the Biden administration, whenever these things happen, has been terrible at reaching out to the rural areas, and it shows. And it happened during the Obama administration, quite frankly. I was doing talk radio during that, and until they realize that they've got friends in local media, I don't see it changing. For one thing, the perception that people have of the Democratic Party is social. And what Joe Biden has done that is brilliant is infrastructure. And if you go to my area, they love the fact they're getting their roads fixed, their bridges fixed, the roads widened. They love the fact they're getting broadband in some of those rural areas. So there's a story to tell there. There's a real story to tell there. But if MSNBC calls tomorrow and asks the member of the administration to come on, they're going to come on. And you look at the number of listeners or viewers they have versus the number of listeners we have, it's really not that different. And so they don't understand how they can help people like you, Congressman, to get elected, to be there, to do those things, just simply by, as Jourdan put it, showing up, giving us a call. It's ridiculous that we didn't find out that he was coming to Grand Forks from them.
Yeah. Jourdan, how do you guys work with the administration, or like how would you recommend the administration to work on a better messaging?
That's an interesting question. I mean, just hearing your question and then Joel, and I've been out here for about 5 years. it totally makes sense to me now. It is a boom moment for me. It's a light bulb going off. Because, and I do notice with even our political correspondent, like we get little announcements here and there, and it's always like the first, or this is most historical. And I think we just become desensitized to it. And it just, one, we don't have enough people. Two, I think it comes at a time when there are a lot of media layoffs happening. So there's not enough people to get to it right now. And then three, I always think about like, all right, this is the first, but like, what does that look like in the big picture? Because again, we're a national, and what does that look like in the, what's the context behind this for us? So, I mean, we try to package things up like little bits here and there into like a bigger story just to maximize, what's happening out there. But I think it's just a really interesting time. Like, again, there are much of media layoffs happening. I just don't think there's enough people. But despite that, our newsroom is growing. It's just trying to, we're human. We have limited capacity. We need to eat.
I hear that. How about you, Pat?
Well, I'd say for the one part of your question about, providing credit where credit is due, we can talk to Democratic elected officials all day long, and they may or may not take our advice. We just choose to lead by example in the way that we frame things. It's, President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law. And whenever we talk about the American Rescue Plan, there is always a line in there that the plan passed without any Republican votes in Congress, so that people know, where this is coming from in case a Republican shows up at a ribbon cutting or something like that. And in terms of the actual dynamic back and forth with Democratic electeds, we've grown to the point now where the press people for the state assembly and the state senate, the Democratic sides of both, I mean, they're constantly offering up their members as guests on the radio show because they know, because then we turn it into news stories on social media posts and things like that, because we do the show with a live video feed as well. And they see the opportunity there, because if they call a press conference in the Senate parlor to talk about a bill, they might get one or two state reporters to come over, but since the bill is not going anywhere, they don't feel the pressure to cover it. But everybody in Wisconsin deserves to hear the point of view, even if it's the minority party, of what they're proposing. They have to be able to compare someplace. And so we're providing that vehicle to, again, at least talk. Again, it comes back to what I said before, having that presence to provide a message to parts of Wisconsin that weren't getting it before. And then you just let that build on itself. And pretty soon you're going to have progressives and Democratic candidates who are being more mindful of selling their message and not just serving. They're always wanting to serve, the public, and that's admirable and everything, but it does you no good if you're not selling your own message and getting elected or reelected. So hopefully this growing progressive media infrastructure in Wisconsin and around the country helps that happen more often.
Oh, that's great. Pat, where can people find your work?
Our website is upnorthnewswi.com, or look for Up North News WI on social media. And again, I'll put in a plug. The radio show airs on the radio stations of Civic Media, a new radio network in Wisconsin. And you can find that at civicmedia.us, where you can find my show and all the other shows, all the other stations. And they were smart enough to also set it up where you can subscribe to all of the shows as a podcast right through that website as well.
Oh, that's great. How about Jourdan? How can people find your work?
Yeah, all my work's on ictnews.org. And then sometimes we're ICT Newscast, which is on local PBS stations and subchannels and social media.
Very cool. And Joel?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at JoelKFGO. You can go to kfgo.com and you can listen to us there. You can pull up the app. The other thing, and I'm on Facebook, obviously you can get us there, but if you come to Hankinson, North Dakota, there's a great big rock that says Heitkamp. So if you can't find me, it's your fault.
I like that. All right. Well, Joel, Pat, and Jourdan, thank you so much for joining us today. Leaders like you still involved with the media. I think the future looks decent and better than I think a lot of us expected. And I want to thank everyone viewing at home for joining us, especially these last 3 days. During the second Rural Progressive Summit, we learned about significant issues like paid family leave, delivering better health care to rural communities, the crisis in affordable housing in rural America, and public attitudes on household financial security. We learned about pressing issues like reauthorizing on the Farm Bill, the positive impact of President Biden's agenda, the widening gap between forward-looking policies of blue states in contrast with the regressive and discriminatory policies coming out of red states. Guest speakers like Audra Milkern and Eternal Polk shared moving stories about the struggles of women farmers and Black farmers to gain recognition and retain their land. The political experts provided more detail on political balance in rural America, the impact of the Dobbs decision, and what we can expect to see in next year's elections. The Rural Progress Summit will be back next June to provide more conversations and more exciting speakers to help us learn more about the future of rural America. In the meantime, please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Check your YouTube page to view the great conversations from last year's summit, and visit our website to read original research like the One Country Rural Playbook, and subscribe to our podcast, The Hot Dish, to keep up with everything One Country is working on. The Zoom virtual lobby will remain open for the next month, so you can view any of these summit panels or speakers you might have missed over the last 3 days. And finally, we would like to thank our generous sponsors, the American Association of Crop Insurance, SOAR, the Save Our Medical Resources, the Federation of American Hospitals, NARAL, Pro-Choice America, the Dickinson Law Firm, Mandate Media, and Voxtopia. Without their support, the Rural Progress Summit would not be possible. Again, thank you. And I want to personally thank the One Country staff for putting on this and all the hard work they've done. And lastly, I just want to thank you all for joining us today, and have a wonderful weekend.